"You're 3 days late on rent." Those were the words my father used to greet me in the house I legally owned. The same house I had secretly paid for. And 8 months later, he was standing on the front lawn holding an eviction notice with my name at the bottom. My name is Caleb. And for most of my life, my parents treated me like a walking ATM they didn't actually respect. Not rich enough to admire. Not poor enough to pity. Just useful. The kind of son who gets called when bills need paying, but somehow never gets invited into family decisions. My younger brother, Mason, was different. Mason was the favorite. Always had been. He was charming. Funny. Confident. The kind of guy who could wreck a car and somehow get an apology from the person he crashed into. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. And responsible people often become invisible. 5 years ago, my parents were drowning financially. Dad's construction business collapsed. Mom had medical debt. The bank was preparing foreclosure paperwork. They were days away from losing everything. I remember sitting in their kitchen watching my mother cry. "We're going to lose the house." Dad looked broken. For the first time in my life, I felt sorry for him. So I did something nobody knew about. Not even them. I bought the house. Before you imagine some billionaire success story, that's not what happened. I wasn't rich. I wasn't lucky. I had spent nearly a decade building a small software company. No flashy offices. No private jets. Just years of 18-hour workdays. Every dollar I saved went into acquiring the mortgage through a legal purchase arrangement. The bank got paid. My parents stayed in the house. And because I didn't want to humiliate them, I kept my name hidden through a property trust. The agreement was simple. Stay there. Pay minimal monthly occupancy fees. Maintain the property. That's it. At first, everything worked. Then Mason got involved. And that's when things started falling apart. One Sunday dinner, Dad suddenly announced, "Starting next month, everybody contributes." I looked confused. "Everybody?" Dad nodded. "You too." I laughed. "I don't live here." He stared at me. "You stay here when you visit." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Mom slid a paper across the table. A rent agreement. An actual rent agreement. For me. I stared at it. Then at them. Then back at the paper. "You're charging me rent?" Dad folded his arms. "You're 32 years old. I own my own place. Then you can afford it." Everyone laughed. Even Mason. Especially Mason. The humiliation wasn't about the money. It was the principle. I was being charged rent in a house that technically belonged to me. And they didn't even know it. I almost revealed everything right there. But I didn't. Because part of me was curious. I wanted to see how far this would go. That was my mistake. For the next year, things got uglier. Every family gathering became a public trial. Dad constantly complained. "Caleb never helps enough." Mom agreed. "He's become selfish." Mason loved it. "Oh please," he'd laugh. "Caleb acts like he's some big businessman." Every insult landed harder because I knew the truth. Without me, they would have lost the house years ago. But nobody knew. And nobody cared to know. Then came the first twist. A massive one. One afternoon I received a call from the property management company handling the trust. The manager sounded nervous. "Mr. Carter, we have a problem." "What happened?" There was a long pause. Someone attempted to transfer ownership documents. My stomach dropped. "What?" He continued carefully. "The signatures were forged." I froze. Who submitted them? Then he gave me a name. Mason. I couldn't believe it. At first. Then I thought about it. And suddenly I could. Turns out Mason had somehow discovered that the property wasn't actually owned by my parents. But he didn't know it belonged to me. He assumed some anonymous investor owned it. And he decided to steal it. The documents were amateurishly forged. Fake signatures. Fake authorizations. Fake notary records. Enough to trigger a legal investigation. Not enough to succeed. But enough to reveal something terrifying. My brother wasn't just irresponsible. He was willing to commit fraud. I confronted him privately. Did you forge ownership documents? The color disappeared from his face. For a second. Then he recovered. No. I slid copies across the table. His hands started shaking. Then he did something unbelievable. He smiled. Okay. So what? So what? You committed fraud. No, he said calmly. I tried protecting the family. I stared at him. He leaned forward. You know what Dad says? I already knew. But I asked anyway. What? That you're jealous of me. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because at that moment I realized Mason genuinely believed his own lies. But things got worse. Much worse. A month later came twist number 2. The real betrayal. Dad called a family meeting. Everyone sat around the dining table. The atmosphere felt strange. Like something had already been decided. Then Dad spoke. We've updated the will. I wasn't surprised. Until he continued. Mason gets the house. The room went silent. I blinked. Once. Twice. Then looked around. Nobody seemed confused. Because nobody knew. Except me. The house. The house they didn't own. The house I had saved. The house I was still paying taxes on. They had just promised it to someone else. Mom smiled proudly. Mason deserves stability. Dad nodded. He's family-focused. I almost choked. Family-focused. The man who literally tried forging ownership documents. That night I sat in my car for nearly 2 hours. Not angry. Not yet. Just exhausted. Because I finally understood something. My family wasn't taking me for granted accidentally. They were choosing to. Over and over again. That was the moment I stopped protecting them. For 5 years I kept their secret. 5 years I shielded their pride. 5 years I allowed them to believe they rescued themselves. No more. 3 weeks later I instructed my attorney to begin formal proceedings. Not revenge. Business. Pure business. The property agreement had been violated repeatedly. Unauthorized structural changes. Unpaid fees. False ownership claims. Fraud investigations. The legal grounds were overwhelming. The notices arrived on a Tuesday. My phone exploded immediately. Mom called first. Then Dad. Then Mason. 27 calls. Ignored. Eventually Dad showed up at my office. Furious. Red-faced. Shaking. He stormed into the conference room. What the hell is this? He threw the notice onto the table. I looked down calmly. Eviction paperwork. Exactly where it belonged. Looks official. His eyes widened. You knew? I leaned back. Of course I knew. Silence. Then confusion. Then realization. Slow. Painful realization. Dad whispered. No. I nodded. Yes. No. The trust owns the property. His face turned white. Then I delivered the final blow. I own the trust. The room became completely silent. For years I imagined this moment. Thought it would feel amazing. Instead, it felt sad. Because the look on my father's face wasn't anger anymore. It was shock. The kind that happens when your entire reality collapses. Mom arrived 20 minutes later. Crying. Mason showed up shortly after. And for the first time in my life, nobody had jokes. Nobody had criticism. Nobody had advice. Just panic. Then came the final twist. The one I never expected. While reviewing old records, my attorney discovered something hidden in the original foreclosure documents. Years earlier, when I purchased the house, my father had known. Not everything. But enough. A confidential meeting note revealed the bank informed him an anonymous family member saved the property. Dad later discovered it was likely me. He knew. At least partially. For years. Which meant all the humiliation. The rent. The insults. The favoritism. The accusations. Happened after he suspected I was the reason they still had a home. That hurt more than anything. Because betrayal hurts differently when it's intentional. A week before the eviction deadline, Dad asked to meet one last time. We sat on the porch together. The same porch where he taught me how to ride a bike. The same porch where he later made me feel worthless. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then finally he asked. Why didn't you tell us? I laughed softly. Would it have mattered? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. After a minute I asked my own question. Why charge me rent? His eyes filled with tears. Real tears. Not manipulation. Regret. Then he said something I'll never forget. Because every time I looked at you, I was reminded that I needed saving. I stared at him. Confused. He continued. You became everything I failed to become. For years I thought Dad hated me because I wasn't enough. The reality was uglier. He hated feeling inferior. And every success I achieved reminded him of his own failures. The eviction proceeded. Legally. Quietly. No screaming. No police. No dramatic scene. Just consequences. Mason moved into a small apartment. Dad sold most of his equipment. Mom found part-time work. For the first time in their lives, they had to live within reality instead of entitlement. 6 months later I sold the property. Not for profit. Not for revenge. Because I didn't want to keep owning a monument to disappointment. The strange thing about karma is that it rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes karma is simply losing access to something you never appreciated. My parents charged me rent in a house I owned. For years they treated me like an outsider inside the very home I saved. And in the end, the last bill they paid wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in consequences. Because the house they thought belonged to them was the same house that finally taught them what ownership really means. And that lesson arrived with an eviction notice carrying my name at the bottom.